Future Proof Mzansi, a podcast where we discuss how consumer behaviour shapes our marketing plans. I'm Stacy.
And I'm Sena. We're colleagues at Kantar and your hosts. On this podcast, we interview the most creative minds and innovative thinkers about the many impactful brands in the country and why people love them.
We discuss what makes South Africans tick, why they do the things they do, and what those things are.
Most importantly, through our discussions, we offer practical advice for how to build brands of tomorrow.
So, Sena, we've spent the first few episodes discussing good creative, which we all know is as important as the media channels that we invest in. In fact, Kantar's cross-media database tells us that 50% of what drives campaign awareness is the strength of the creative, and the remaining 50% is the media channels and synergies. So the right creative needs the right channels to make sure it's successful.
But what happens when you have an amazing creative and you place your adverts on all the right channels, but the country hits stage 6 load shedding and no one gets to see it?
That's a good question, Sena, and probably the right time to be asking it just post-elections. And it's also one that came out in our Media MasterChef event a couple of months ago, where we unpacked the findings of our media reaction study. And advertisers asked us, well, how do you ensure that we're getting the most out of our budgets in this world of load shedding, and particularly as it relates to TV ads?
Which is why we have two experts in this field to offer some advice. Our first guest has worked in various roles across marketing, digital, and strategy. He spent 9 years at Mediacom, working mostly with Coca-Cola, and was the company's chief strategy officer for Sub-Saharan Africa before he left. He recently joined PhD Media as their managing director. Welcome, Brian Muguto.
Hi guys, thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to be chatting to you guys, and I hope I really do leave some sort of value on the table for whoever's listening.
We also have in our virtual studio someone with over 2 decades of experience in the media industry. He's worked for some of the biggest media agencies in South Africa, including Mediacom, Omnicom Media Group, and Dentsu. His experience combines strategic communication, data analytics, and media intelligence. It is a pleasure to welcome the head of media intelligence at DStv Media Sales, Byron John.
Hi Stacy, Sena, how's it, Brian? It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So we have someone who works in broadcasting and someone at an agency. We're hoping to get a well-rounded view of how to make the most of advertising budgets, knowing that we'll have to contend with load shedding for the foreseeable future. But before we get stuck in, I would love it if both of you could give us a quick overview of who you are and how you got to where you are today. Brian, let's start with you.
My history actually started off in oil and gas marketing in Aberdeen, Scotland, and that was my first job out of university. But as it happens, I missed the sun and came back to Africa and South Africa more specifically. I started off at a digital creative agency doing digital strategy. And then my curiosity led me to join a media agency because I wanted to know how the other side of the coin worked. I've since moved on from being just a digital strategist, expanding my repertoire, if you like, to be an above the line strategist. And I think towards the last number of years in my role as chief strategy officer and maybe before that as head of strategy, more business strategy and comms strategy combined.
Byron, what about you?
Yeah, so started off at the broadcaster, at actually the public broadcaster, SABC. Then I moved and actually worked at, it was called TNS back then, but it's actually now called Kantar. So I did a stint there and I worked on the DStv iPanel. And then eventually found myself back at DStv where I currently am. But in between there, I moved to MediaMark, worked a bit on radio, a bit of digital, a bit of TV there as well. Then I moved to a company called Abari Media, which is a digital agency. And then I moved to Dentsu, which was my journey into the media agency world. Then I moved to OMD. And then I moved to Mediacom, where I actually worked with Brian on some of the accounts. So we've worked together previously. And now I'm at DStv, the public, the satellite broadcaster for South Africa and also into Sub-Saharan Africa. But it also includes the streaming portion as well. So it's not just the TV broadcast. There's a lot of other, avenues that we work with here in terms of DStv content. And that's me.
So thank you for the introduction, gentlemen. So
As we mentioned, we recently released our annual media reaction study, and we found that watching traditional or linear TV amongst a connected population has increased by only 8% year on year, while watching TV on demand has increased by 38%. Byron, are you noticing a similar trend, and how are you adapting this shift when you speak to advertisers about their budget allocations?
Yeah, so look, the obviously I have access to lots of different data sources, and I think what's important is to understand what data source are you looking at, what was the methodology, how was the questionnaire constructed, etc. So, your study was designed to offer that to its advertisers, which is fine. When you look at other studies, you do pick up some other interesting things, like for example, the latest BRC data that was released end of last year, just in terms of what's happened since 2019 to 2023, and just to look at that trend, you'll see that the population's obviously increased since 2019, when the last time they did an establishment survey study. So the population's increased, households have increased, the number of televisions have increased, right? So it's not that there's been a decline in terms of watching in the living room, but the way that people are watching has changed, which again confirms some of what you're saying. So the old view of looking at a TV and watching a program, and once you see the program, it's gone, and that was your experience of watching TV. That's completely changed, to a large extent, because there are things like decoders, there are things like media boxes, there are things like internet fiber streaming, connected TVs, smart TVs. So it's completely changed. So if you're saying, has it declined in terms of the TV viewing? I would say yes, it's declined in terms of the traditional way of viewing TV, right? In terms of viewing on the TV screen, no, it hasn't. It's just the way that people are consuming it. What's on that TV screen has changed. And that's where it's quite interesting. So it becomes more of a challenge now for marketers, because it was easy if everyone was just watching a broadcast, and you could just hit everybody.
And Byron, have you found that that there has been a decrease in the moment TV viewing?
You see, I'm not too afraid with your methodology in terms of your sampling and how you did your sampling, etc. So I'm not going to talk too much to that. But I'll just give you a sense of some of the other data points that have given me some insight into the landscape. And when I say data points, I'm not talking about one set of data here. I mean, I've looked at yours, I've looked at BRC, I've looked at MAPS data, I've looked at Brand Atlas data, and I think what is interesting is that this country is so diverse, and it's the most unequal society for a reason. You've got this small percentage at the top who've got all the means to do everything, and it's just a minefield of stuff. People are streaming, people are on decoders, people are on different boxes, people are cutting decoders and only stream. And then you've still got this huge portion of the population who are getting a decoder for the first time. The biggest proportion of DStv subscribers on our base are the compact subscribers, the guys who are entering for the first time. So it's increasing in some cases. In the top end, some people are getting rid of decoders for some, because they find that they're not sports people, for example, so they want to just do the Netflix thing, and they are happy with the YouTube thing or whatever. So we get some of that. Yeah, I think it really depends on what you're looking at, what your target audience is, what's the category you're interested in, who you're targeting, who the consumer base is. So I'd love to say it's a very simple thing to say, yes, it's just declining, but it's actually so much more nuanced than, and I know I haven't answered your question with a yes or no, but it's just so complicated.
Yeah, fair enough. We are South Africans where they're most aware of seeing advertising, considering all of their offline and online platforms. And interestingly, people say that they are most aware of seeing ads on TV. If you ask them where they're most receptive to receiving ads, so where they're most welcome to hearing from brands, traditional TV falls way further down in that list. So Brian, given your holistic view of all of these different advertising channels, why do you think people are less receptive to watching ads on TV than they are on other offline channels?
Yeah, so I think when you speak about traditional TV and awareness of advertising in that platform, it's because on traditional TV, it's linear. You're kind of like subject to the order in which things are presented to you, and there's going to be a scheduled ad break, which is going to be populated with a set number of ads. So you're going to be aware. But receptivity is the openness to get those things, right? And when you start to look at the other channels that you're mentioning in terms of like out of home, sponsorship, product placement, those things are less interruptive of what it is that you're consuming. So if we were to take out of home as an example, I'm sitting in my car driving to work and I'm sat there for an hour. I see an out of home billboard. It's an interesting or fascinating distraction from the mundane that's the car in front of me or beside me or the taxi driver who's trying to do something random and put me in danger. So suddenly the context that frames how I'm receiving these adverts or how these adverts are coming at me is very different. You know what I mean? And depending on how fast that traffic is moving, in keeping with the out of home example, I probably have a lot more dwell time to look at this thing and, understand what the copy is talking about, digest what the call to action is. I might even misbehave and take my phone out and take a picture so that I can share it with somebody or post it on my stories on Instagram or whatever social platform that I'm using. So it just creates a different kind of environment. And the same can be said as well about even product placement, because I think product placement there's some sort of novelty about it, right? You're watching what you're watching. You don't have to stop what you're watching. It's not an ad break necessarily, but there's this brand that's come into frame, and it's like, oh, okay, this person is drinking that. That's interesting, or that person is advertising in that little billboard on screen. But again, it's just a novelty about it, and you kind of get a little bit giddy for a second that you've seen it, and then you carry on. And maybe there's things like familiarity of the brand that you see while you're playing your game on PlayStation that sort of makes you feel like, oh, I can't believe this brand is in this environment where I am too. Whereas TV, it's happening to me, traditional TV, is happening to me, and therefore the dichotomy between the awareness that traditional TV delivers versus the receptivity that you get on the other channels.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And I mean, I can't say that our typical South Africans are such media junkies as you are, as to kind of take photos and send it on to people. But thank you. So, Byron, I'm curious. Have you started to see many of your clients requesting these sorts of things?
I wouldn't say a lot. I mean, I do see it from time to time. There's some interesting technologies that have come into play in recent years. For example, post-production, there's a way of actually digitally embedding the product after the production has happened. But I'm actually quite a big fan of it at the moment. And the reason being, I'll tell you why. It's because when we have a big show like Shaka Ilembe, which was launched in June last year, you find that when the launch date happens of that event on screen, etc., the sponsor likes to be where it was launched live. But what I noticed a few months after the last episode was aired, even into like October, November, we found that it was still ranking within the top 10 shows. Then when you go to the likes of a Showmax, where it's being launched on a Showmax or on a DStv stream on catch-up, you find months afterwards that people are still consuming that content, because for them it's the first time that they're receiving the content. It's the first time they're watching the show. And I just think that clients are maybe missing a trick in terms of how consumers are consuming TV. And I talk about TV, but in our case, we've shifted completely in terms of just TV. It's now video. So it's not static anymore. So I think the product placement, or at the very least, making sure your brand is attached to that piece of content so that it does have longevity moving forward. So I'm quite a big fan of being strategic, but for advertisers, it's not as quick as a 30-second spot, and it's not measurable like a 30-second spot. So I get why clients are not, entirely for it, but I think there's some really real good value in integrating your brand into those kind of stories.
Byron, I must just say that since you mentioned Shaka Ilembe, I am such a huge fan. Perhaps this is why the repetition of ads wouldn't have bothered me as much. It would have been, a small price to pay. But the biggest challenge that marketers and broadcasters are facing is actually being able to ensure reach and frequency for what was paid for. And our research found that South Africans are experiencing high repetition of adverts, which is undoubtedly frustrating. How are you working with brands to get the most out of their investment without frustrating consumers in the process?
The first thing I'll say is that for the most part, for the majority, consumers don't really care. Number one, they don't really care about advertising in general. And number two, they don't really care how many times that you pepper ads at them unless it gets really over exaggerated. And I've experienced it personally in my life on a YouTube channel where for some reason I got the same ad no matter what I did. I can understand that occasion when it's every day, all day, every moment, every time you open up. But I don't think those experiences are happening all the time, if I'm honest. I think that from a digital point of view, most digital campaigns are frequency capping. I don't think we've ever had a case where a customer has complained about the frequency of the ads or the ads being irritating as such in terms of the number of ads. They're just looking for what's in it for them, and is that going to add value to my life right now?
And Byron, have you noticed that in order to give advertisers back that reach and frequency, that you've had to create more repetition of ads?
Technically speaking, you only have 180 seconds in an ad break. So it's not like we can throw in, 10 more ads. But basically, Acasa has given us limitations that you can only, put so many ads per hour. So if they are seeing more ads, I think it's more perception than anything else. And it could be a couple of things as well. I mean, if you're in load shedding, right, you're going to default to other channels like DStv catch up, or go to Netflix or go to YouTube or whatever. And there, you've got a bit more control of the ads you see or don't see, etc. So it could also be this perceptual thing where I've been in load shedding for 2 hours. I've managed to choose my content and skip through the ads or get around the ads. Now I'll come back to my traditional viewing, and now I'm sitting through the ads. So maybe it's just a heightened thing. But just from a technical point of view, there's no evidence whatsoever to show that we've increased our ads.
Thanks. That's really good to have that confirmation. So thank you. And Brian, how are you managing this global stakeholder expectations? Because globally, people would expect to see the return on their TV investment. Many foreigners probably can't get their head around the concept of load shedding. How do you manage those kinds of conversations?
Well, I think the first thing is that we're in most cases, we're not dealing with a completely globally based client, right? So most global clients have an office here, they have a marketing team here, they're actually people on the ground that are experiencing load shedding just like me and you. It doesn't necessarily reduce or take away the pressure, because yes, their global counterparts may be asking questions of them, and they'll be asking questions of us. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what's then required is a solution. So I think, part of it is definitely trying to solve for the channels and make sure that the assets that we've built and the objective that we're trying to achieve within that channel is not completely deteriorated. And that comes from having strong partnerships between agencies and our media partners, and being able to have grown-up conversations about how do we strategically get around this. Is it spots are replaced at a later stage? Is it that there's a commercial model that allows for us to be compensated for spots that didn't flight, and so on. So there's that. But I think more importantly, from a strategist or a media strategist point of view, is understanding the behavior of the people that we're trying to connect with. And if there's a time pressure to communicate a specific message, then understanding, well, where do they go and how do we follow them to those places? And if there isn't a time pressure, then it's then about, how do we make sure that we're able to revisit them in the environment that we originally intended for us to connect with.
You touched on something there. You spoke about the commercial model, whether the broadcasters are offering a commercial model to compensate for lost slots. Byron, have you been offering this to media clients?
Sure. It's very difficult. And look, when I started here, I mean, load shedding was at its highest. So I had to do, and one of the first projects I had was to do an intense deep dive into load shedding and how it's affecting our TV audiences. So there's a lot of moving targets, but it's not as simple as that, because remember, the load shedding happens in stages, but it also happens in different areas. So how are we going to identify just the 52 suburbs on my left, hypothetically, that had load shedding now? The other 52 have just come back on because they were off for the last 2 hours. They went off now, and they're coming back on. What through our investigation, what we did find was that we could do other things for the clients. So we could offer them better strategies to deal with what was going on. So we actually had this deal where you could have like a 15, 20% on every schedule, additional spots that we suggested. What you do is you add those spots on in addition to your campaign length, because if you stretch over your campaign over time, the likelihood of reaching more people over time is higher. So that was one of the ways of mitigating. Like if you've got a load shedding stage 6 in week 1, what we were trying to do is saying, well, don't put your whole campaign in week 1 if it's stage 6. Wait till it gets to stage 4 or stage 3. So you need to extend your campaign. We sat with them to alternate the phasing of their campaigns. We sat with them to optimize their audiences, the spot lengths, pre-planning, trying to pre-plan when load shedding was coming, trying to pre-plan around certain events that were coming. We knew the government wasn't going to switch off around the finance announcement or the Rugby World Cup final. We knew those things. So we did a lot of strategic thinking, like Brian was saying. Like there's so much strategic thinking that's got to go into this. But I think, look, I'm happy to also, if any of your clients want to get a one-on-one on the insights of load shedding, I've done extensive analysis on it. I feel like the load shedding expert in the country at the moment. But anyway.
Oh, careful. We'll take you up on that offer. Thanks, Byron.
Byron, as the self-proclaimed load shedding expert, obviously people are migrating to digital. But how are you using these sort of digital channels to help advertisers maximize their investments?
Yeah, so look, I mean, we've seen a huge growth on DStv Stream. I mean, you can imagine. But look, just to be pragmatic, right? Again, we live in the most unequal country in the world. So not everybody's on digital. Not everybody is streaming to their heart's content. We still pay one of the highest data prices in the world. So I'd love to say that everyone's sitting there just being able to stream everything, but it's just not the case. But we do see that there is this shift and this migration into DStv Stream. In fact, some of our biggest audiences on DStv Stream are through the compact bouquet. It's not premium. I know most people, as soon as you say DStv Stream, people think premium. But for every package that you subscribe to, if you subscribe to the family package or the compact, you get DStv Stream on that package though. All those compact programs that you like, you can download them on stream and watch them on stream. So when load shedding hits, then you still got the DStv on the stream. And we see that obviously the live streaming, there's a lot of interest in the sport. People want to watch the sport now. They don't want to watch it later. So that's dominated by sport. And the catch up is basically the general entertainment. So people are, they want to watch their show when they want to watch their show. So that's also great. And then, we understand that that's how the world is moving. So it's still growing. But we are starting to use, some of the innovations, like we've got pre-rolls for our catch up. So when you go into catch up and you want to watch the latest episode of whatever, you've got a pre-roll that happens on the decoder box as well as on your mobile phone if you're doing the stream. We've also just launched in the last couple of months a thing called dynamic ad insertion. So what we're able to do now is we're able to dynamically insert on the digital streaming environment a different ad completely to what you're seeing on the satellite environment. TV in this country is still massive. It's still high reach. It's still massive. The way that people are finding the content, etc., is starting to change. And once people get the means for digital, they go there. That's there. But the key content piece is what we've seen is that people are agnostic to how they get it. They just want to get it.
I love that example of you were watching the same show on two different devices and being shown different ads. And I'd love to just touch on that for a moment with you, Brian, to ask you whether you are seeing your clients creating ads that are specific for digital platforms, or would you see them still as sort of cut down versions of TVCs?
Sometimes the TV ad or the video, let's call it the video, is the asset, right? and that's it. And it then has to be translated into the different environments that it must live in. So yes, you will get cut downs or variants that will then go on to exist beyond um, TV or the big screen into smaller screens, into roadside screens. So there's always going to be um, an element of an original asset sort of manipulated to exist in other environments. And sometimes that's because the messaging is the messaging, but also sometimes it's also because there's a cost restriction, and sometimes it's also because there's a capability problem. So you might find in some instances, for example, that there's a creative agency that is used to producing traditional TV adverts, and now they're being challenged to produce for other platforms, and for them the solve is just cut it down. But obviously the creative agency or production landscape is also evolving, right? So you will now have specialist agencies or production units that will produce specifically for digital platforms, specifically for digital out of home. I mean, now we've got like these anamorphic billboards and that sort of thing. That in itself is an additional capability that now needs to be accounted for. And obviously, there's going to be a lag time between when the platform and the technology is developed and the people who are producing the content or creative for that platform can catch up, and the appetite for the client to cough up for that additional variation. I don't think necessarily there's an unwillingness by any client or brand to produce for different platforms. And to be honest, in a lot of our implementation strategies and plans, we are including guidance in terms of the different platforms or formats that are available, the sizes, the technical specs that go with it, so that we empower as much as possible our partner agencies in the creative space to be able to go and produce for all of these platforms.
Thank you both. Definitely some fascinating and insightful discussions. But before we let you go, we always like to ask our guests some general questions. I'm going to ask you, Brian, first. If you had to write a book tomorrow, what would you write about?
Um, I've got a friend of mine, an old school friend of mine who farms. And then there's another friend of ours who is looking for solutions to drought and food shortages and that sort of thing. And together, they've created a company that speaks to using AI and other tech to solve agricultural products. And periodically they've called me in to consult with them and talk to them about how to develop their products, how to package them, and how to market them, which I find is a very interesting space, this agriculture, because in a lot of cases in our world we are marketing very well established brands, but you don't often hear somebody going into the product benefits of cauliflower. So I've learned a lot through the experience and developed a lot of opinions about it. And I'd imagine there's a very interesting book in there somewhere.
I'd be keen to read that. Thank you. And Byron, looking to the future, what big trends do you expect to see in advertising in the next year?
The biggest would be AI. I've done a lot of research on AI. It's a passion of mine at the moment. Now, I've got subscriptions to ChatGPT, I've got subscriptions to Perplexity, to Claude, to all of them. And what the pundits are saying at the moment is that it's actually quite unsophisticated compared to what's about to come. They're saying, like, if you think this is cool, wait until you see GPT-5. And I mean, they're already exploring this idea of agents, and agents. I mean, agents is literally, I don't think people really understand it, but agents is something to the effect of saying to a AI model, I'm running a campaign for X, Y, and Z. I need 5 Instagram posts with images scheduled for the next 6 weeks that only get posted at the right time, culturally and contextually. I want you to feed the API of that into a dashboard via whatever dashboard you want, and send me the reports on a Monday, every Monday. Capability of GPT-5 will be able to execute that task from start to finish using 5 different AIs, all working together from a pre-planning point to planning, to execution, to implementation, and then reiterating, relearning, fixing its mistakes, going back, rechecking its work, literally like human being, but at a different level. Now, can you imagine having that tool in your hands and being in the marketing space?
Profound indeed. Thank you so much for joining us today, Byron and Brian, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in. The Future Proof Mzansi podcast is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and YouTube. For more information, you can follow Insights by Kantar on LinkedIn and X. We would really love to hear from you guys, so please leave us a review and remember to subscribe on whatever platform you listen to your podcasts on so you never miss an episode. Until next time.